like to introduce somebody whom I have a huge amount of respect for, a person of the Wigan gown himself. I'm not sure whether the correct address should be my learned friend. Of course, Brother Ahmad Thomson is a British barrister and a writer. He was a co-founder of the Association of Muslim Lawyers and has authored renowned books such as The Last Prophet ﷺ, and Islam in Andalus. So, huge amount of respect for my very dear brother Ahmad Thomson.
Assalamu alaikum, good evening everyone. Alhamdulillah, it's very good that Allah's brought us together this evening. And it's a wonderful theme also that has been chosen for this evening, of the good word, being like the good tree. And of course, each individual is like an individual tree. But then also, when you bring all the trees together, then you have a forest. And this can have an amazing effect on the environment. And we know in this age that we live in, that the kind of big corporations are busy destroying the lungs of the world. You know, the big rainforests, whether in the Amazon or in Indonesia, places that for centuries were allowed to grow free. Now they're just being cut up, and whole indigenous tribes, their whole livelihood and way of life is being destroyed, all in the name of making money, really. And this is having an effect on the world. And as we know, just recently there's been talks in Paris. So we live in an age which is increasingly fragile. And the Prophet ﷺ said, there will not be a time which is not worse than the time before it until the Qiyamah. So in the way we see devolution rather than evolution, which is taught in the mainstream society, that somehow, you know, the society is becoming better and better, even as it becomes more and more degraded. And yet, in spite of this, we also have the saying of the Prophet ﷺ, that the mu'min, the Muslim, is the one who, if they were planting a tree and the Qiyamah came, they would continue to plant the tree. And the meaning of this is obviously that if the Qiyamah is coming, that tree is never going to grow. You know, if you're planting that seed, it's not going to have time to grow and to mature, to bear fruit. And yet, we have a condition, an inward condition in our hearts, that nevertheless, however short time may seem, we will continue to look to the future with hope. And this is very much part of what Islamic Shakhsiyah Foundation is concerned with. Because there's more to life than just planting trees. They need to be looked after. They need to be pruned. I had the father of a good friend of mine at school. He was a wonderful man. He'd been a colonel in the army. But he loved gardening. He was a farmer. And he was saying one evening how important it was to prune trees in order for them to grow properly and to bear fruit properly. And I said, well, how do you prune an apple tree? He said, my dear fellow, it's very simple. You just talk to it. and you know, this was a completely different way of looking at things. But he was certainly one of the people I always remember, may he have peace in his grave, as someone who was very thankful for his life and who made the most of it, even though at times he went through very difficult periods. He was in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. And we find this with all the people who inspire us, that whatever the situation they find themselves in, they make the best of it. And they inspire hope in those around them. And this is something very much that the Muslims are in a position to do, simply because we have the confirmation from the Prophet ﷺ, that if we live in a certain way, we will arrive in the garden, in the Akhirah, inshallah. And the alternative to that is something which puts fear in our hearts. You know, when you reflect on the fire in the garden, when you think about what the fire involves, it puts fear in your heart. And when you think about what the garden involves, it puts hope in your heart. And so we act not really to show people how to live, but really as a means of self-preservation, more in the next world than in this world. But by following that pattern of life, in fact, we do provide a good example. In fact, we are like a good word, that is like a good tree, that does flourish and does bear fruit. And this is something that each one of us has to remember. There are times, especially in these times, when the odds against the deen ever becoming established seem overwhelmingly against. But then we are reminded by the words of Allah in the Quran, when He subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allah will perfect His light, however much the kafirun detest it. And it is because we recognize that Allah is in charge of what happens, and that in fact everything is by the decree of Allah, the good of it and the bad of it, that we know that however loud the words may be from the trumpets of the kafirun, and there's certainly one trumpet in America that's blowing quite loud at the moment, but it's they don't have the final say in the matter. They only can do what Allah has decreed for them. And the best that we can do is, in fact, to invite them to embrace Islam, as I have done to Donald Trump through Twitter, because that's the only thing that's going to save him in both worlds. Whether he accepts the invitation is another matter, but this is part of what the Muslims have. From a position of knowledge, we can be generous to the people who are ignorant and who have a bad intention towards us. We can nevertheless have a good intention towards them, while accepting that, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in a hadith Qudsi, in the Akhirah, He said, I've created the garden and the fire, and they will both be full. That means that in this life, there will be people of the fire, and there will be people of the garden. And we ask Allah to make us people of the garden. Because, as the Rasul said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, no one can get to the garden simply by virtue of their own actions. And the companions who were present said, not even you, Ya Rasulullah. He said, not even me. And they said, well then how do you get to the garden if it's not through your actions? And he said, it's by the overflowing generosity of Allah. And this is something, again, that puts fear in the heart even of the mu'min and the mu'minat, because you realize that if Allah wanted, He can put you where He wants. He can do with you as He wishes. But we then, by the power of dua, we ask Allah to be generous to us and to, by His generosity, to give us the best of the dunya and the best of the akhirah. And it is this spirit which is very much to do with things that are in the unseen, which in fact then has an effect outwardly in the world. I remember my teacher once saying, he said, you're never going to be in the headlines, you're never going to be in the news, but you have to be like the yeast in the dough that makes the bread rise and makes it tasty. And this is something that I've seen just in my lifetime as a Muslim, which is now more than 40 years since I accepted Islam. And there's been such a change in society that even though times seem to have got darker, the luminosity of the Muslims has grown brighter. And now when you look at society, you will find a Muslim in every level of society. I know that some people make a big fuss about the Muslims being underprivileged and undereducated and filling up the prisons. But in fact, when you look, you find Muslims everywhere. And I think in a way it's almost a distortion of the truth when people paint that kind of depressing picture. It's true that there are Muslims in prison, there are Muslims who are not doing very well in life, but what we find is that everything is in movement, everything is dynamic. And just as people leave the deen, people also enter it. And we ask Allah to be part of that energy that is concerned with establishing the deen, because we know that this is pleasing to Allah and that Allah will help us do it. And by this means, this whole country can be transformed. Already in my lifetime, I've seen cities in England, parts of them anyway, being completely transformed. So that they're kind of green areas, where there's no, you can't get any haram food in the shops, and there's no public houses open anymore. And instead there's gatherings of dhikr and Muslims eating good and halal food. So we see how people, by coming together, transform their situation. And certainly with the Islamic Shakhsiyah Foundation, this is very much the main intention, as Farah was saying earlier on. If we can educate people properly, educate our children properly, then they will have an effect on society, and each one of them is a tree in their own right. But together, we're a forest, and we're part of one of the forests that make the forest of the Ummah. And as we know, the Ummah is still recovering from the Khalif having been removed, and from the Ummah having been carved up into national kind of entities, where people end up supporting their national football team and saying how awful their national leader is, and really completely losing a picture of what the Muslims used to have, where you had a ruler who ruled across a large part of the world through governance and through selected amirs and sultans, but for whom in every mosque at the Jummah, everyone would make prayers for that leader and say, please guide this leader. But the Muslims, Allah has given us access to see what is of worth in life and what is valuable in life. And we can then become a word that then becomes manifest in society. We can actually transform society. And in a way, the more that the current society collapses, and it is in collapse in many aspects, the more you can see the Muslims actually quietly but steadily growing in strength, in numbers, in knowledge, in wisdom. And just by the way we live, we transform society. We don't have to broadcast it on the media. We just have to, each of us, lead our own daily life. But the more we lead those daily lives as part of the community, and then as part of a national community, part of a world community, then the more, in fact, people will see the truth of that ayah. That yes, we can be a tree if we look after that tree, and if we tend it, then it will grow and it will flourish. And at the same time, we have to bear in mind that nothing in this world lasts. Every tree has its cycle. It starts as a seed, it grows, it's a young sapling, it's vulnerable, it has to be looked after. And then it grows in strength, and then it has blossoms, and then it has fruit. And this happens year after year, but there comes a time when the tree begins to get old, it may get a disease, and at some point it will die. But the thing is that in its lifetime, it has already produced so much fruit and so many other seeds, which take plant somewhere else, and sometimes nearby the tree, and sometimes the wind and the sea carries them to the other side of the world, and they catch root there. So this is a very dynamic process. I remember one of the words of Bob Dylan in one of his songs. He said, whoever is not busy being born is busy dying. And the Muslims are the people who are busy being born, because we realize life is very short, it's a gift. We make the most of it. We pick up knowledge wherever we find it, because this is the lost property of the mu'min, as the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we realize that after the world, once we pass through the doorway of death, then there's a whole new dimension of life that awaits us. And this life is very short, and the next life is very long. This is why the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, be children of the akhirah and not children of the dunya, because the dunya is leaving you and the akhirah is coming to you. And so we ask Allah that for all the Muslims, that we're busy establishing the deen, that we're busy seeking knowledge, that we're a people who learn something new every day, that we're people who are filled with the awe of life and awe of you, subhanahu wa ta'ala, and with love of the Rasul. And we ask that this thirst for knowledge will take us to a station of being wise and of understanding existence and knowing our place in it. And we ask that we're a means by which society is transformed for the better, even though people are trying to destroy it. And we ask for the victory that you have promised to the ones who trust in you. And we ask especially for success for the Islamic Shakhsiyah Foundation. It began very humbly, like a small plant, and it's growing stronger. And we ask Allah that it has many years of bearing fruit and bearing seeds that are scattered right across the face of the world, and not just in England but beyond. And we ask that you reward all the people who've been responsible for helping it to grow and for tending it. And we ask you to bless all the people who are taught there. And we ask nothing but good for it and its people. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Malik yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim. As-sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim. غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد عبدك ورسولك نبينا وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Thank you.